Well, good afternoon to all our viewers for this Action on Empty Homes webinar. Big thank you to Will, Chris and Brigid for joining us. You won't hear from me for long because the three guests was just dropped to two, but they're our primary purpose for being here. So I'm sure that many of you, like me, have followed the excellent work of Action on Empty Homes over the years. They get great press coverage, some amazing reports, and I'm sure many of you share the exasperation of seeing disused homes sitting empty and the major issue of second homes and Airbnbs in tourist and coastal areas. So empty homes are a really key part of the housing crisis debate, however you frame the housing crisis. So, as I said, we're very grateful to have, first of all, Will McMahon, who's been with Action on Empty Homes as a director since 2018. Will's going to talk about the overall strategy, upcoming national campaigns, research and policy work. He'll be followed by Brigid Carey, who's the consultancy and projects manager. She's been with Action on Empty Homes since 2016, and she'll talk about a study that's focused on bringing empty homes into use through community-based approaches, which will be interesting for all our community groups listening, and about a new community-led retrofitting of empty homes. And then finally, hopefully, we've had some technical problems, but hoping that Chris Bailey will talk at the end. If not, Will do his talk. He's been campaigns manager at Empty Homes, Action on Empty Homes since 2017, with a background in communications and community-based regeneration. And Chris will talk about a 2-year project in London with a community-wide coalition challenging planning that produces the wrong kind of housing. And I think we all know about the wrong kind of housing. So, with no further ado, I'll pass over to Will, who will kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, I'm just going to do an intro for 5 or 6 minutes about the overall work. And if you've got any questions, do put them in the YouTube chat and they will appear on our screen and we will be able to take them and field them at the end of our introductions. So, introducing Action on Empty Homes. We work in 3 main areas. We provide the only independent analysis of government data on empty homes. We research solutions that will bring empty homes into use, prioritising provision of genuinely affordable homes, i.e. low-cost homes, for those in the greatest need. And we campaign to change policy at a national and local level to combat the factors that increase the number of empty homes. So talking a bit about our independent analysis of government data, we analyse trends such as the steady rise since the end of the last National Empty Homes Programme in 2015. Numbers are now around 20% higher. They've been growing for some time. There was a spike during COVID, which has come down now, but the trend is up. There's no doubt about that. We ask questions and query why numbers are rising fastest in the areas with high levels of development. In London, Manchester, the South East and Eastern regions, you've got lots of development, lots of building, but you've also got rising numbers of empty homes. We recognise that the highest numbers, though, and some of the worst long-standing concentrations are still in the northwest, with the highest regional levels in the northeast. So what we're looking at really is what used to be thought of as a northern problem around levelling up is actually now a national problem. And that's a really important thing to recognise. There are lots of alliances that we can build with people in cities, small towns, the north, in the countryside, to address what is a national and widely spread problem. We question definitions of vacancy. We've done a lot of detailed research on and work on second homes and furnished empties and their role in concealing vacancy levels. We've lobbied for the reform of the second homes category in official data. For example, you can actually own 4 homes and all of them might be categorised as second homes. We're also for the reclassification of so-called furnished empties as single empty homes. And we use data to offer insights. We find out lots and lots of really interesting stuff. And there's lots of really interesting mapping I could talk to you about and probably bore you with because it is fascinating about the spread of empty homes. But some of the data that we've got, for example, one of them was that between 20 and 2021, Southwark suddenly acquired 3,000 furnished empties or second homes, which is phenomenal if you think about it. So we're quite big on data, how the data is collected, what the data means, being very inquisitive about the data, because what you originally see isn't really the full story. So we research solutions which will bring empty homes into use. We are really prioritising affordable homes, as I said before, and those in greatest housing need. We support community-led solutions and have a long track record of working with successful community housing organisations. We've got a current focus on sustainable retrofit to meet local needs and support climate action. We've recently produced a community action on empty homes toolkit, which Bridget will be talking about quite a lot, to support community organisations and councils creating affordable homes from empty homes. So we've got over 5 years of research that's underpinning all the work we're doing in this area. We kind of favour a carrot approach. We kind of favour encouragement. We favour getting empty homes owners to do the right thing, but occasionally, unfortunately, a stick is needed. You do need some enforcement sometimes, and to help us along the way with that, we've got a legal toolkit to assist council officers in action against recalcitrant landlords and owners. They also offer advice. We also offer advice and consultancy. So our campaigns, we really, probably like yourselves, we campaign to change policy at national and local levels to combat those factors that increase the numbers of empty homes. Residualisation of increasing numbers of older homes into empties is a real problem. Retrofit could be an answer there. We look at new homes which are being kept out of residential use by investment strategies, buy to leave, buy to Airbnb, the luxury urban towers, the new build that's going on all over the place, not providing low-cost housing. We look at holiday lets and second homes in coastal and rural locations. We also are focused on the lack of central government support for local government in tackling empty homes. Now, when the coalition came to power, it now seems so long ago, given everything that's happened in the last decade. But if you think back to when that happened, one of the things the Liberal Democrats got was an empty homes cluster fund, and that brought back around 9,000 empty homes back into use, most for less than £20,000 a go, and quite quickly. Now, the interesting thing about this policy is it's rare that you get a social policy where people sign up to it, the government implements it, it works, and then you don't do it again. Okay? It doesn't make any sense. So really, government should be doing it again. We know this works. So in addition to that kind of policy campaigning work, we've launched a coalition called Campaign Against Empty Homes. And in that campaign against empty homes, we've had the big issue, Streets Kitchen, Street Storage, Labour Homeless Campaign, the Green Party, many other organisations have been involved in it. We've had a couple of days of action, and we've got our third day of action coming up on the 22nd of October, Saturday the 22nd, to which you are all invited to take part. Sometimes it's groups of 10 people complaining about empty homes or developments that are going to produce empty homes. Sometimes it's 2 people with a placard making the point in their area. It doesn't matter how small it is, make your point on that's the day to make your point on empty homes and what it's doing in your community. So that's the kind of campaigny side, grassroots stuff. Also, we do lots of policy lobbying. In the last month, we've been to local government conferences and events of the 3 main parties. We've been to Conservative, Liberal, Democrat and Labour to press for change and to call for communities to have a central role in tackling empty homes in their area. Now, because over 500,000 homes are out of residential use, this is why we think they matter. It's too many. So government figures tell us there's about 237,000 over 6 months empty. But in addition to that, we look at underutilisation because we think that's important. And you've got 320,000 second homes and holiday lets that are out of residential use, and they're pushing up rents and purchase prices across the country, and they're having quite a damaging impact. So we think well over 500,000. If you add the short-term empties, you're edging towards 1 million properties that have no permanent resident at any one time, which is quite a big figure really, and something needs to be done about it. We believe that vacancy in all its forms exposes the failure of the current housing development model. And this model, we think, often builds in vacancy through off-sale plans to investors. We also think it's important to look at retrofit. We think locally led retrofit of empty homes offers an opportunity to develop skills, build sustainable local supply chains, and support local companies. We think that's crucial, and I'll leave Bridget to talk more about that. But we know the environment is top issue of the day, for a lot of people. Most of these themes that I've talked about over the last few minutes will be picked up by Chris and Bridget in their presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now hand over to Chris. And shall we see if this works, Chris? Are you with us, Chris?
Hopefully you can hear me.
We can hear you. So I'm going to add
that's marvellous. Apologies, everyone. I'm on my phone because my laptop suddenly decided it didn't want to talk to the world today.
So I'll add your slides to the screen, Chris. And when you want me to change slide, just say very clearly, next slide.
Certainly will. Okay.
Let me take you back to the start. Go on.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's just really a rehash of what you've just said, really, about the nature of emptiness, really. At any given time, there's 1 million homes without anyone living in them, and about 500,000 of those will remain empty on a long-term or indefinite basis, and those are essentially your long-term empties and your second homes or furnished empties. Yeah, I mean, and rather like that headline says, you can build as much as you like, but if you build the wrong kind of housing, you're not going to sort out our housing crisis, and that is the core of our message, really. And I think it's something that, as someone who lives and works mainly in London, although obviously I travel around the country, I'm in London. You're struck more than anything else, perhaps, by the fact that you can hardly turn a corner without seeing an advert for a luxury tower of apartments, or without seeing a crane on the horizon. And the vast majority of the 500, there are currently over 500 20-story plus towers with planning permission in London yet to be built. It's a kind of like a permanent pipeline of about 500 actually in this city. And yet, despite all this building, we never seem to be contributing to solving the homelessness crisis. And in fact, the number of homeless families living in state-funded temporary accommodation at a cost of 1.2 billion a year, 2/3 of which is delivered by homeless families in London, more or less, has gone up during this period of intensive development and intensive price rises in London and indeed around the country. So one of the questions one always asks is, where are all these homes going? And that's basically why I work for Action on Empty Homes, because when I investigated the data, I found that the answer was that a lot of these homes weren't housing anyone. And this is the same problem that you see in coastal resorts where homes are being snapped up as second homes, whether they're new build or whether they're existing housing. So that's quite a long introduction, but now we can say next slide. So obviously, here I am in London. Why am I talking to you about London? Well, because I think London tells us quite a lot about our housing market, quite apart from the fact that it contributes quite a lot of cost to our temporary accommodation bill. Because a lot of the things that are happening in London reveal the failures of our housing market. So 4 years ago, we were funded by Trust for London initially, and they've since funded us twice more, so we must have done something right. We were funded by Trust for London to investigate what was known as the buy-to-leave phenomenon. They actually, put out a call for ideas and chose our idea. But what we found when we looked at buy-to-leave was that, while there were examples of buy-to-leave, and buy-to-leave varies enormously, it can be a developer developing a building, and rather like Centrepoint, and in that picture there, which is a story in The Guardian from 2018, the developer there found that they couldn't sell the flats for the price that they wanted to sell them for. So they just literally kept them in their portfolio unsold, and an enormous number of them are still unsold. They're paying council tax premiums on them because it's better to pay a council tax premium, double council tax, than it is to sell the flat at a loss and accept that they actually put the development on their books for more than it was actually worth. So that's one side of it. But the other side of it is obviously, if you're a Russian or Chinese businessman and you want to ensure that your newly found wealth is safe from the Chinese Communist Party or Vladimir Putin, and then you buy a few flats in London, and you're not really worried about anyone living in them. You're not really worried about income stream. The main thing you're doing is looking after your cash and making sure that your unscrupulous government can't get their hands on it if you say the wrong thing to the wrong person or whatever. So there is that side of it. It does exist, and there have been huge amounts of work done on money laundering, and the fact that because we have such good relations with this network of crown dependencies and tax havens, that there are tens of thousands of homes owned in London and indeed around the country. Actually, only about half of the homes owned by anonymous entities in tax havens like the British Virgin Islands and close to home places like Jersey and Guernsey. Only about half of those are in London. The rest are scattered around the country. But leaving that aside, what we found was much more complicated. We found there were lots of homes that weren't housing anyone, but were in use. They were in use as maybe Airbnbs. They were in use as various types of short let. So in other words, what we found was there are lots of ways you can make money out of a home, as well as just leaving it to go up in value, which of course is the thing that our overheated property market does deliver for buy-to-leave owners as well. Anyway, we've produced 2 reports from that project, Pretty Vacant and Nobody's Home, and if you want to read them, they go some way to explaining why. Firstly, if you keep on building luxury housing, you won't meet the needs of people on lower incomes, and secondly, why we have an almost limitless supply or market for luxury housing, but it doesn't actually house anybody. So, and we did lots of work. We analysed data. We talked to councils. We talked to council officers in confidence about how they were classifying various forms of home, and we found out lots and lots of fascinating stuff that basically revealed that, as tends to happen with official statistics, that when you pick at them a bit, you find there's a lot more to it, and usually there's a lot more to the problem than they reveal as well. So moving on, next slide probably is a good way to move on, really. The second homes category is one that we got particularly stuck into because we discovered that second homes were really just empty homes with furniture in, and the majority of them weren't in use. And it's interesting, actually, because we've made some progress with this argument, but as I'll come to later, I think the strategy that the government is pursuing in response to our critique of the second homes category might get them into use, but it's not necessarily going to get them into use as homes. Because at the moment, you can avoid paying any tax on a second home. So you can basically flip it out of council tax into business rates. And because of the way business rates are calculated, if you only have one in that borough, you will receive a 100% discount on your business rates as a small business for your second home. And government's supposed clampdown on this simply says that you have to let it for a minimum of 70 days and you have to advertise it for 140 days. And this, of course, it might contribute enormously to the Airbnb and tourist trade, but it's not going to contribute to housing supply. And in fact, I think, strangely enough, the proposals they've made in the latest Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill might actually incentivise more people to flip their homes over to business rates. So it might have one of those desirable effects for government of lowering a statistic while making the problem worse for the people who elect them. Next slide, please. Yeah, I mean, so as we were saying last time, on the last slide, the sort of net sum of this is that you can build developments, you can build new housing estates, but they won't contribute the amount of housing that they're supposed to. So they won't, and they're leaving aside the fact that luxury homes aren't going to be occupied by people on lower incomes, and that the biggest demand is for genuinely affordable social housing, council housing, and that's how you really solve the homelessness problem. Leaving that aside, if the home isn't in use at all, it's not even going to have any notional trickle down effect of liberating other housing as people move out. So going back to the slide here, this slide focuses on Airbnbs, and that is simply a map that I downloaded last night of Airbnbs in London. So those are the ones that were available last night. There's just under 40,000 of them available last night. 64% of them, I think, off the top of my head, were whole homes. So they were just the ones that were available last night. The general estimates for London range from 40 to 50,000. Although shortly before the pandemic, London councils also estimated slightly higher at about 1 in 50 homes being used primarily as an Airbnb let, which would have pushed it up towards the 70,000 mark. So it's a massive chunk of data. There's no licensing scheme for them. There's no proper recording of them. Some of them will be classified as second homes. Some of them might be classified as businesses. Many of them are probably still hiding in the residential data with an assumption that they are in fact primary residences. So And we kind of looked at this across boroughs in reports like Pretty Vacant, which I mentioned earlier on, and there was really no consistent relationship between second homes, empty homes, and Airbnbs. We found out lots of interesting things, but essentially what it told us was that the Airbnbs weren't being properly recorded because there wasn't really a category to put them into. But certainly when those 3,000 furnished, normally let properties or second homes suddenly appeared in Southwark during the pandemic, I think that gave us a big clue, particularly because of the type of flats they were and where they were located, that these were probably Airbnb lets, which were suddenly classified as empty during the pandemic because the market had been shut down. And we kind of had a look at that a year after the pandemic, and the majority of them were still there. So, and that category, which isn't an official category of a furnished empty normally let, is a category that a number of councils use to classify property that is theoretically a furnished let, but yet always seems to be mysteriously empty whenever the council come to check on it. In other words, no one lives there, and it doesn't have any long-term letting. I mean, it's quite clear what it is, really. It's just that there isn't an official category to categorize it. And there are huge numbers. I mean, there are 50-odd thousand of these furnished empties in London. So very significant. Right, next slide, please. Sorry. So moving on to answers. I've still broken it down to 3 sections. We need to build the right stuff. We need to stop building the wrong housing. That means we need robust local plans, which aren't undermined by national development policies. And that's why both the Community Planning Alliance and Action on Empty Homes are part of the Better Planning Coalition. And one of the challenges of that coalition, one of the challenges for it, is to look at how new national development management policies, as they're called, will interface with local neighbourhood plans. And the current bill seems to suggest that the local plans will be overridden by the national policies. And that's essentially what's often been happening, except with the most robustly drawn up local plans to date. If a developer can't get what they want built, they take it to appeal. There's a thing called a assumption in favour of sustainable development in the national planning framework. It doesn't mean sustainable in the way that it would to you or me. It doesn't mean net zero. It just means economically sustainable, and that means guaranteeing 20% profit for the developer, and not necessarily guaranteeing any affordable housing. So we need development that meets the net zero challenge. This is another aspect of the work of the Better Planning Coalition, which is a very broad coalition containing everybody from the sort of RSPB and the National Trust to on one side, to shelter and people, campaigning organisations like ourselves on the other side, and with a lot of other people like the Bat Preservation Trust and various heritage bodies in between. And that is about the net zero challenge. It's about development that isn't going to essentially make global warming worse. So it's about working towards turning round the enormous challenge that Britain's housing presents. At the time that we reach the point where we're supposed to be have reached net zero, 90% of the homes that we live in at that point have already been built. And guess what? They are the least well insulated in the whole of Europe. we literally leak more heat. We're more inefficient. Our housing, and that's partly because our housing is older, and we didn't have tanks roll over us during the Second World War, forcing us to rebuild it afterwards. So, it's not all about building incompetence, but it is a fact. We have the worst insulated housing in Europe, and we need to sort that out, particularly in the context of rising fuel bills and costs. And obviously, we need social and genuinely affordable homes first, not as an afterthought, not as with sort of scrapings of the barrel after the developer has taken their nice fat profits and paid themselves their bonuses. It should be possible in a local plan to say we need to meet local housing needs first, rather than having a continual battle between our local housing needs being sort of elbowed into the plan after the developer has built the large executive homes on the greenfield site that they want, which are probably of less interest to the person who can't afford a car and needs to be close to transport. On the pure, simple, narrow point of second homes and holiday lets, these should be a separate planning class. Just as a straightforward thing, not just for new build, which is something that can be imposed through local planning, but for existing residents too. Changing a primary residence into a second home or a holiday, that should require planning permission. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but it means that you should be able to have a local limit. And
Chris, I'm going to have to push you along here because you had.
Yeah, I'm being a bit slow, aren't I? Sorry.
Yeah,
all right. Second part of the answer is register, license, and limit. We need a national landlord and property register because we need proper data on what's happening to our property and who owns it, and because that's key to effective local enforcement policies. We need a licensing scheme for Airbnbs and short lets so that communities can set their own limits. And we need tax rules that incentivise long lettings over short lettings rather than vice versa. And as I said, the government's current proposals give a free pass to landlords if they flip to Airbnb might actually make the coastal and rural housing crisis worse. Next slide, please. And yes, finally, as I said, we need to use wasted empties. Wasted empties do offer us assistance in meeting the net zero challenge, and local communities and councils need stronger powers to bring them into use. Wasted empties left to rot could be retrofitted as sustainable warm homes. This will have a lower carbon footprint than new build, and Royal Institute of British Architects have said quite clearly, the lowest carbon home will always be the one that's already built, basically. But instead, what we have at the moment is great demand for genuinely affordable and social housing, but each year we end with thousands less social homes. So we need to prioritise what these homes are used for and what we're building. And there's a little example of what happened to our social homes last year. We built less than 6,000, we sold off over 17,000, and we demolished 4,000. So we ended the year with 15,000 less, and that's been what's been happening every year for the last 10 years. In fact, except it's been more like 20,000 a year net loss. Next and penultimate slide, or more or less final. So I think, as I say, let's work together. Backing communities' desire for fair development that meets local needs, for less vacancy and for more retrofit is actually backing the majority of local people against vested interests and house building monopolies. And it makes climate sense because, as I said earlier, the greenest home is always the one already built. And and that essentially is where I end. If you want to see the reports we published, there on the next slide. I'm sure this can be circulated afterwards if anyone wants to click on them. They're all links to the various reports there. So thank you very much, and sorry I overran.
All right, I'm going to quickly bring Bridget in. I'm going to add your slides to the stream now.
Oh,
okay, go ahead, Bridget.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. I'm going to talk about three things really. One is communities directly bringing empty homes back into use for local people. The other is a model that we are in the process of developing at the moment called community partnerships around empty homes, and also about retrofitting empty homes and how that can be community led. But just to give a little bit of background, Esme Fairbairn have provided us with funding since 2016 to look at working with communities around bringing empty homes into use. The first project that we had was between 2016 and 19, and we studied 6 communities who were at various different stages of development, bringing empty homes into use for local people. A couple of them were very well established and had been going for quite some time. Some of them are very new. One of them, Sinsel Bank in Lincoln, didn't have any properties at all yet. So it gave us quite a good broad picture of the process that communities go through, if you like, to set themselves up to bring empty properties into use. The really interesting thing was that of the 6 that we followed, only one of them, Gyroscope in Hull, had been specifically set up to refurbish homes. The others all had completely different starting points, but recognised that to really help members of their community, they needed secure, affordable housing. And they set about using empty homes as a means of providing that. Something else that we found unexpected, I suppose, was the extent to which communities deliver so much more than simply bringing empty homes into use, really valuable though that is. All of them that we followed provided education, training, work experience on site for people. So that was as broad as language skills, sort of STEM skills, leading through to plastering, bricklaying, plumbing, all sorts of different aspects of the construction trade. And what that meant was that people who lived in the community were able to really engage with these projects and to benefit from them, not just in terms of housing, but in terms of their life opportunities. And many people either found the volunteering that they did on the Empty Homes projects as a really good vehicle into work, or they went on to further training and education. In fact, the projects in all supported over 600 people through that work experience and training process in the 3 years that we followed them. They also supported local social enterprise, community enterprise. So they would create places for bakeries, cycle workshops, office space for new startups, a whole range of facilities, free broadband in some areas for residents of their properties. So they didn't just contribute to bringing empty homes into use and increasing the supply of affordable housing. These projects made a significant impact on the infrastructure of the community, the sustainability long-term of the community and of the local economy. So really, we thought that the conclusion that we sort of came to was that if you turning to the slide now, we can all recognise the sort of the pink. No, don't. Could you go back, please?
Sorry, I said next slide.
The pink cycle that we can all recognise, where you get into sort of spiral of decline, where you've got unmet housing needs, community gets really frustrated, there's economic decline, you get antisocial behaviour, especially around empty homes. And all that adds up to pretty poor health and well-being. But when the empty homes are brought into use and all those other outcomes are delivered, it's possible to switch to a much more virtuous cycle where people, once they have that secure, stable accommodation, can become healthier, get into work, communities become safer and more resilient, and there can be, for the area as a whole, some real economic regeneration. And we think that's because communities understand the impact of empty homes for them much more than anybody else from the outside would be able to. They seize the opportunities for work experience and training during renovation, and they value and the value of delivering community homes from homes standing empty. Next slide, please. So we focused quite a bit on community intelligence as a real driver for successful initiatives by communities on empty homes, and also on language. And I think this is true in planning as well, that a local authority, when faced with an area that has a high level of empty homes, will ask a simple question: how can we reduce the number of empty homes? It's a good question, but it's not the question that the community is likely to ask. They're more likely to be concerned with, well, how can we live well here and thrive here? How can this be a place for us? Which includes, how can we bring down the number of empty homes and make them into homes that we can live in, but also brings in all those other aspects of community life that make a community tick. And as I said before, because they live in an area or a part of a community, they really understand what makes them tick, and they understand where to focus resources to make a real difference. And that's what we call community intelligence. And the same is true with planning, really, in that most planning authorities are really focused on how they can deliver their housing targets. Whereas for communities, The issue is much more one of place and the sense of place, and making the most of those things that people value in their area. So I think there is quite a parallel between the work that we've been doing around bringing empty homes into use and the work that we need to see done around the planning system. Next slide, please. So after we'd completed that 3-year piece of work, we thought, hopefully there's a model here that we can aim to replicate across other communities. So Esme Fairbairn funded us for a further 3 years to create a community action empty homes toolkit, which is a toolkit really for use by local authorities, communities and other partners to collaborate together with the communities in the lead, if you like, to bring empty homes into use. It's a kind of this is how you can do it resource, if you like. It was developed in consultation and collaboration with communities, so it's been well tested, and it provides a sort of step-by-step walkthrough how communities, in partnership with local authorities and other organisations, can bring empty homes into use and at the same time help to revitalise their local areas. So that's what the toolkit looks like, and inside it's divided into 2 parts. The first part really is the sort of business case, the why should local authorities in particular work with communities to bring empty homes into use. But the second part of it is a sort of very practical guide, and it's got all sorts of little diagrams and flow charts and checklists and information about things like writing business plans, designing building specs and all that kind of thing. So hopefully it's a very practical toolkit that people can pick up and use and help them guide them through the process of bringing empty homes into use. Okay, next slide, please. So in parallel with working with communities who are directly bringing empty homes into use, we also started looking at the sort of level up, if you like, at broader community partnerships. And if you look at the sort of Venn diagram here, in the 3 circles, there are overlaps between all the different partners. So, people and agencies do work with local authorities and elected members. Local authorities and elected members work with the owners of empty homes and communities. But there is this point at the centre where everyone converges. And that's the point where we thought we'd like to explore whether we could set up or help to set up empty homes community partnerships. Next slide, please. And the idea there is that there are multiple stakeholders around empty homes. It's not just about the house itself and the fact that it's empty. It affects so many different people in the community and aspects of community life. So there are multiple stakeholders in terms of local people, local businesses, local construction companies, the police get called out to antisocial behaviour, the fire brigade that have to respond to arson and that kind of thing. And that because there's this sort of group of disparate people and agencies around an empty home, it's actually an opportunity to have quite a broad-based approach for cooperation to try and encourage an owner to bring that property back into use. It means some new ways of thinking and some creative partnerships and perhaps different conversations than we're used to having. But we've found from experience that it is possible to build momentum for action, and that sometimes communities and other agencies can have a different kind of conversation with the owner of an empty home than the local authority can. We've found that sometimes people can be quite defensive in the face of the local authority, but more cooperative when talking with people who have a genuine interest in their home being used to meet a local housing need. So again, it changes the nature of the council role to one of supporting and enabling rather than directly doing, unless there's some enforcement needed. It means identifying people who are affected and who can help and who can benefit, and coming up with a collaborative plan for development and delivery. And we're at the moment we're working with a local authority in Thames Valley to see how we can bring forward an empty home community partnership approach by engaging with stakeholders in a couple of wards in their area to identify what resources may or may not be available, and also importantly to secure some sort of agreement around a local lettings plan, so that any properties the community does enable to be brought back into use aren't just used to meet needs off the housing register. Okay, next slide, please. Right, so that was communities action and community partnerships. We're also, as Chris mentioned, doing a lot of work at the moment around empty homes and net zero. We started work in this area probably about 18 months ago. The COP26 summit was a great catalyst for us and a platform for us. We held some events at the COP Fringe and also during the COP Climate Summit in November last year, where we collaborated with some architects and the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership. As Chris alluded to, if you look at the map, I know the numbers are a little bit small, but in the UK, over 5 hours, if the temperature is 20 degrees inside and 0 degrees outside, your average British home will lose 3 degrees of heat, whereas in Norway, at the other extreme, it's 0.9 of a degree centigrade of heat. So, you know, just evidence really to back up the notion that in Britain we do have some pretty leaky housing stock, and that applies to the properties that are being brought back into use. So empty homes provide a really good opportunity to retrofit older housing stock as it's renovated, and to deliver from that retrofitted and renovated housing stock affordable homes that are not just affordable to rent, but are affordable and sustainable to live in as well. And we are doing quite a lot of work. In fact, we have a new project in that area in the moment. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, for the COP26, we produced a retrofit call to action, which is on our website, and we'd be delighted if you would sign up to it. This was a call to action was to retrofit empty homes as they're renovated and help to address carbon emissions, to retain carbon capture, and to deliver properties that would help to address fuel poverty. This was a partnership between ourselves, Scottish Empty Homes Partnership, the Welsh School of Architecture, and the Architects Climate Action Network, ACAN, in England and in Scotland. We're taking, I suppose, by having this approach, we're taking a fabric-first approach to deliver sustainable, affordable warmth, but learning from what we saw communities doing, we think that this can be done. You know, retrofitting of empty homes can be done in such a way as to help develop green skills, to explore opportunities for green finance, and to build the local supply chain at the local level. And we have funding again from Esme Fairbairn to undertake a 1-year feasibility study to design and test frameworks for community-led retrofitting of empty homes. Now, that project will look at 4 frameworks, really. One is building community capacity. to understand climate change, the challenge of climate change, and what needs to go into fully retrofitting an empty home. We'll be working with in 3 local authority areas with colleges that provide training in construction skills to encourage them to invest in green skills training, and with local contractors to help to build the supply chain, and also with sources of finance to see whether we can pull in the finance that's needed to be able to fully retrofit a home and still have something affordable at the end.
I'm going to have to push you along, Bridget, because we're
last sentence. We'll be producing a report at the end of this project. We don't need this slide, it's okay. Producing a report at the end of the project, which we hope will show that this is feasible and we can move on to a 3-year delivery project.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got questions, which is great, and we're going to have to rattle through them because we've only got 15 minutes because we were slightly over our time. Apologies for that. So I've got one for you, Chris, which is Shelter gave stats of 772,000 second homes used as holiday homes, if I'm not mistaken. What do you make of that?
I think actually, although there will be slightly more, I'm quoting stats only for England, but I don't think, I think it's doubtful that the other 500,000 are in Scotland and Wales. I suspect that they're using stats for additional homes. There are several different data sets that I saw George Monbiot quoting some another different number actually in the Guardian at some point. So there's a data set that asks people if they have additional homes, but that includes buy-to-let properties that they own and other members of their family occupy, ranging from granny flats to actually buying granny a flat. And in some cases, it contains overseas homes as well. So it could be that they are using that data set. But when I talk about second homes, I'm talking about this particular government category of a furnished empty home counted as a second home.
Okay, I'm going to push on because we've got quite a few to get through. Sandra says, are all Airbnb under the business laws and taxes? Good question, Sandra.
Well, the short answer is no. What is interesting is that from the end of the 2018 tax year, Airbnb did finally agree to share data with the Inland Revenue, which they didn't share up until that point. And that means that people that don't declare their revenue are potentially exposed to the Inland Revenue coming after them. And that has improved the situation, definitely. But the other reason it's worth mentioning that incidentally is because that makes a nonsense of Airbnb's claim that they can't collaborate effectively with local councils because they actually give end user information on individual owners of flats to the Inland Revenue. So they can certainly do it to local councils.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. Caroline Dibden I think she's put this on the YouTube site. We'll put the links. Community Planning Online will put links to the reports on our website and our Facebook page. So if you didn't quite get all the slides, you can probably have the slides and have all the links. So don't worry about that. We'll give you all the information we need. Alan from Cambridge, Caroline says, can't get into the chat, but asks, we have an issue where Cambridge City Council, supposedly the enforcing body, is working with a local developer, Hill Residential, to sell new homes to the Chinese and Hong Kong markets. There is even a full sales presentation in Chinese on the internet. We're naming and shaming them to no effect. Are other councils doing this? I think they might be.
Of course. Yeah. One of the problems with large-scale development is that you almost have to sell 20% of it off-plan to satisfy your financial backers. And in fact, I did a thing with Metro a few years ago, and they interviewed a big developer in Manchester who was quite open about this. And he said, it's not a great outcome, but I have to sell 20% of my stuff off-plan just to satisfy my financial backers, and that means it's easier to sell it in Malaysia, Indonesia, China, Singapore, this sort of market. But yeah, I saw the Cambridge story, and we have kind of retweeted it disapprovingly.
Okay, I'm just finding some more questions we've got. One on I think this might be one for you, Bridget. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development adopted in NPPF 2021 legal case, not meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. I think that might be a comment. I kind of leave that there as a comment. Unless you,
Yeah. I think the problem with, language is so imprecise in a way and open to interpretation. Sustainability means so many things for different professions. Sustainability in planning terms, as I understand it, is as Chris defined it. You know, it's is it a viable scheme? And in that sense, it means, is it an economically viable scheme? So I think, you know, we may be able to challenge or press for a more meaningful definition of sustainability. Because if you look at sustainability in the climate context, it has a totally different meaning.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to push on. Another one from Kathy, actually. I think this might be a rhetorical question. Can we prosecute Michael Gove destroying houses, farmland without infrastructure, polluting waterways, and see it against the will of local authorities and residents to help construction companies? Good question. Might be a very long answer.
Maybe we should try.
Okay, so good question though. I'm gonna push on to another one that we've had. Is there a website where people can find the numbers of Airbnb in each local planning authority? Chris?
Well, yes and no. I mean, because there's no statutory regulation, you won't find the total number. But what you can find is the number that are available at any given moment in time. And the easiest one, because it offers you a free account, is a site called AirDNA, which is a commercial tracking site. And it is just, you just put AirDNA, it's just airdna.co. And you can put any area in, like a city or this kind of thing, or a borough. There's also a thing called Inside Airbnb, which is a sort of critique of Airbnb, and they kind of track stuff and they do a little bit more analysis. And so they have servers that scrape data off over long periods of time, so they can give you kind of more accurate figures for totals.
We yesterday. Oh, sorry, Bridget, go on.
No, it's okay. I wanted to comment before you go on to the next question.
Go on.
No, it's not about this question.
All right. Okay. So I had a meeting with a guy called Murray Cox yesterday, who's in New York and who runs Inside Airbnb. And he basically committed to work with us in a campaign because people in urban centres, countryside, coastal areas are being impacted by this global organisation. So we're working with, as part of our focus on Airbnb, we're working with academics who are looking at the impact of Airbnb and short lets on highly touristed areas and areas which are thought of as desirable. And that research is coming out in August next year. So there's a lot of work. It's not only, to be honest with you, it's not only kind of a coalition between urban areas in the country and rural areas and coastal areas that we need to build. We need to build an international one because it's an international company and we have to have an international response to it. And they're all people campaigning on that issue, incidentally. I'm going...
Can I just make my comment?
You can now, yeah. Go
ahead.
I
just wanted to go back to the previous question about prosecuting Gove.
Oh, yeah.
And just pick on this bit on the being against the local authority's will. I'm assuming it's against the local authority's local plan. Now, there's a weird thing here that the local plan is signed off by the planning inspector. So you would think that the planning inspector supported the local plan that the local authority put forward. If a developer appeals against a planning refusal by the local authority, the appeal is to the planning inspector, the very person who approved the local authority's plan. So I've raised last year with my local MP, who unfortunately is rather, well, not the most effective, whether this presented some sort of legal conundrum, because how can the planning inspector on one hand say that's a perfectly good and suitable plan, on the other hand allow quite substantive appeals against the fundamental elements of the plan. So it might be worth raising with your MP, is what I'm saying. Pose the question.
See what they have to say.
Yeah.
I've got Mary Parker makes a comment. Surely the reason why so many people buy second homes is because the interest rate on their savings is so low. What do people think? Rosie, what do you think?
Sorry, I had to find mute. Yeah, I think that is that's definitely one of the reasons. I think there are a number of reasons why, but that's certainly one of them. Wouldn't disagree with that.
Chris, you've gone silent again.
Yeah, sorry. Change, and obviously, the number of people whose pensions have been, terminated, or their pension schemes have been closed that offer benefits. That's obviously, it's all accelerated our overheated housing market. But yeah, when it comes down to it, we make sort of democratic choices as a country about this stuff. And sometimes we see unintended outcomes, and then we have to make other democratic choices, really. Whether that's through local planning or indeed national elections. So no, I mean, I think I completely understand the point you're making. Housing has become a very, very safe investment, but it's a choice how we allow that to happen. I mean, it's an interesting statistic that people in Denmark own far more second homes than we do, but it doesn't affect their primary residential market, and that's because most of them are wooden things in woods that are permissioned as second homes. And that's the answer. I mean, when I was on a Tortoise Thinking on second homes a few weeks ago, the campaigners from Cornwall were saying, look, we've got no objection to people buying holiday chalets. We're very happy to give planning permission and for them to pay business rates for these developments, on appropriate sites. They contribute to our local tourism industry. But what we want is that the people who work in that tourism industry can afford to rent or buy homes in the area where they are being asked to work and where they've always lived. And that means that you have to not lose stock in primary residential use. Broadly speaking,
and I think that okay, if you want to invest in housing, then rent it out. It's the problem is that it stands empty for long periods of time when it should be residential. A residential home. If it's your investment or your retirement nest egg, then let somebody else live in it in the meantime.
Okay. We
need to properly define the difference between those two markets. That's basically we need housing that is for holiday let purposes and housing that is for primary residential purposes.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm going to put up a couple of comments now before we finish. John, MPPF has 3 sustainability objectives: economic, social, and environmental. Is clearly in the last place for a reason. And Kathy, who's been very active. Hello, Kathy. Do you think it's a good use of tax money for local authorities to fight local people to preserve land and old housing stock instead of destroying them? What do people think?
Fight people. I'm not sure about the fighting people.
Okay.
I think I suspect what she's talking about, in whichever side of the debate you happen to be on, is this conflict. I mean, people are going to have a number of ways to express their conflict through planning, but that's why you need good, robust local planning that genuinely involves people and genuinely expresses people's local needs. And that's why I think you should be able to prioritise meeting local housing need in local planning.
She meant fight them in court. That's what she meant.
I see.
Yeah. Okay. We have a minute left, and I'm a stickler for time. So when we finish at 5, we say we finish at 5, we will finish at 5. Rosie, thank you very much.
Well, no, can I thank you, please, in my minute?
Yes.
Yeah. Give Rosie a minute.
Right. Well, no, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. I found that really, really interesting. I mean, the million unused dwellings, the fact you're out there doing all this analysis, being independent and challenging, it's invaluable. And really inspiring that we can all help work together with the toolkit. There's a day of action coming up, which will be superb. And we, Community Planning Alliance, completely agree with you that it's about building the right things for local need in the right places. Got to be truly affordable, and everything should be towards net zero. And sustainability is a really thorny issue. I don't think it's clearly defined at all, but that's a separate topic for a separate day. So that's practically going to take us up 5 o'clock on my computer. Thank you for your timekeeping, and thank you all for speaking for us.
Yeah. See you soon. See you all campaigning soon.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.